Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Answers News for Wednesday, September 15th. Welcome to our studio audience. We'll trust you heard them clapping for us there. I'm Roger Patterson, joined today by Brian Osborne and Dr. Jennifer Hall Rivera. And we're here for Answers News on kind of a dreary, rainy day here in Kentucky, but we need a little rain. It's been a bit dry for the last few weeks and could use a little bit of that moisture.
We had a bit of sunshine just a second ago because somebody knew Bliss, Idaho. Is that right?
All right, so before the show starts, we always interact with the audience a little bit. We try to hear where folks are from, and I'm always sad because there's never anybody in the audience from Idaho, my home state. Today, we were blessed with a couple from Idaho and another lady from Idaho originally, and they even know where my hometown Bliss, Idaho is at. So that was wonderful. I got all flustered. We started the show late.
He was so happy. It's awesome.
I love it. Little ray of sunshine there. Oh, Brian's going to turn his phone down.
I am, very quickly.
All right, we've got some great things coming up here with the ministry. Our first opportunity to do a new homeschool event that we're calling Building Strong Foundations, a homeschool experience. And as we've surveyed the opportunities to engage with homeschool families and all the different conventions and other things that go on, we're going to be presenting this opportunity coming up in May of 2022, so next spring, and give homeschool families an opportunity to come and engage with our opportunities down at the Ark Encounter, the Answer Center there, get some great teaching, do some family workshops.
Get to see our new science lab.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes, we've got a new science lab that's being built. We were just down there the other day making some final adjustments. Cabinets are going in. You're kind of excited about that.
I'm super excited about that. So we've been planning for, well, almost a year at this point. So it's finally coming to fruition, and it's really exciting. And you'll be teaching at the homeschool conference, and I'll be doing some teaching. I know Brian will be speaking as well. So we're really excited about that.
Should be good.
Yeah.
Yep, so we'll be hosting that event. So hope you can make plans for that. Come as a bring your whole family type of event, and we'll be able to enjoy the Ark Encounter as well as lots of great teaching from our teachers here as well as others who will be joining us. And then we've also got our women's conference coming up called Rooted, Standing Firm in a Twisted World, and that'll be in the end of March and beginning of April. We've got great people like Laura Story and Daryl Harrison coming to join us, as well as other staff speakers here. I'll be speaking, Ken Ham, Dr. Purdom, others talking on various topics that are relevant to women. So this one's just for you ladies. You husbands can stay at home and let the ladies enjoy this one. It'd be a great opportunity for you to get your ladies from church together.
Right.
Sunday school class.
Maybe you've got a friend that you
group.
left in Texas when you moved away to another state, and you can meet up here and have a reunion time there at the women's conference.
It's an extremely popular conference. It's just done really, really well.
And we have a great time of fellowship, and
absolutely.
they have some great vendors for us. There's a little shopping too, which I know I enjoy doing. So,
and it fills up pretty quickly.
Another reason for the guys to stay home, I guess.
I'm with Roger, but the women do like it. It fills up really quickly, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's jump into our fluff article to get things started today. This is a fun one. Stingray photobombs baby's picture with a matching expression. So this UK mother was at an aquarium and had her young one there in the stroller, and you'll notice the face of the baby there matches pretty much exactly the stingray's expression there swimming up inside the aquarium.
Go ahead, Roger.
Go ahead, Roger.
Roger is going to
biting at the
put a
bit.
dampener on this article, but go ahead.
I'm the perpetual killjoy. Now, you might think that looks like the eyeballs and the mouth and just matching that little pattern there, but that's actually the nostrils. Okay, those aren't the eyes. The stingray's eyes are on the top of its head, so you can't actually see them. So the stingray isn't actually looking at the baby and seeing what's going on there.
But it's actually lifting its nose towards the baby?
It's trying to sniff through the glass, I guess. No.
So, it is a cute photo.
It is a very cute photo.
It is a cute photo.
Yes.
I don't doubt that, but a very cute expression there. And it's very interesting, the expressions that we see on God's creatures as they look back at us. We often wonder, what in the world are they thinking with those silly expressions?
I love how the mother in this article said, you know what, the Stingray was making the same miserable face as my baby. She said her baby did not smile that much in the baby's first year of life, and she was kind of worried about that, but she lets us know now that the baby's much happier, smiles a lot now, in case you're wondering about that. Not that miserable.
All right, our next
Right.
article. Oh no, I am missing a slide. Well, we'll do this one without a slide here. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Christian extremists are passing forced birth laws. So as we look at this article that comes to us from Breitbart, this outlines a couple of tweets and details some information that talks about how Christian extremists are passing forced birth laws to intimidate and cut off abortion services, including for victims of rape, incest, and child abuse. And this is coming from one of our lawmakers out of New York, and she's expressing this in a tweet, and it's specifically aimed at the new law in Texas that's prohibiting a lot of abortions. And she's expressing this concern with a lot of fervor and what we would understand to be an appeal to emotion. Of course, she's expressing concern from her worldview perspective, but a lot of emotion is coming forth in this appeal.
Even just the language that's being used, Christian extremist. That word is meant to put the reader on their guard and be ready. Oh my goodness, this is going to be really horrible. These are like terrorists, like the Taliban. Kind of that correlation, that's the language being used here. And passing forced birth laws. You're being
since when giving birth was like forced birth, right? You're going to be
Yeah.
forced to give birth to a human life.
Yeah.
But so many bad things, so many things wrong with what's presented here. Number one, it's not just Christians who are actually pushing for these laws. And we're not passing forced birth laws, we're passing anti-murder laws. Because abortion, at its core, really is the murder of an innocent child made in God's image. And so these laws are meant to protect life. That's really what they're all about. But she uses a common argument for the pro-abortionists that's just not valid. You notice in her wording, we're passing these forced laws, and these laws are applied to all women, including victims of rape, incest, and child abuse. And the idea is like, well, you got to be for abortion, because what if the victim is rape or there's incest involved? Then you got to allow abortion there,
They're
right?
trying to pull on your heartstrings.
They really are.
Yeah.
And of course, no doubt, those things are awful. When incest occurs or when rape occurs, it's an awful thing. We know that from a biblical worldview, it's horrendous, it is evil. And it cries out for justice and care for the mother, no doubt about that. But this is such a red herring, and it's used all the time. Because understand that incest and rape account for less than 1% of all abortions. And then bear in mind, when those things do occur, as heinous as they are, the sin of the father does not nullify the innocent baby's humanity and the fact that they're made in God's image. All right? So what you do in those cases is you punish the rapist, and then you care for the mother and protect the life of that human being made in God's image residing in the mother's womb. That's why we understand that from a biblical perspective. And understand that answer is not that hard if we approach it from a biblical worldview. So don't get intimidated when you hear this sort of argument.
Yeah, and also another thing she points out here, she says, while we fight back, know you still have options. Pills can be mailed to your home discreetly. So with this law, it basically prohibits a person from being involved in an abortion that dismembers a fetus inside of the womb. Now, that doesn't outlaw the use of the typical chemical abortifacients that would be delivered through pills and those types of things. So she's here promoting abortions by using pills. And those types of abortifacient pills can be ordered online many times without even seeing a doctor. In some states, you have to see a doctor. You can do that over telemedicine and those types of things. That's kind of dependent on state laws. But here we can very clearly see how they're seeking to work around, no matter what type of laws we're going to pass, because of their worldview and their desire to end the life of these babies and not have to live with the consequences of their choices. They're going to work around those things to deal with those things. Nancy Pelosi, another lawmaker, goes on to talk about this law, and she says, every woman everywhere has the constitutional and moral right to basic reproductive health care. We will fight SB 8 and all immoral and dangerous attacks on women's health and freedoms with all our strength. So talking about abortion in the terms of reproductive health and women's health and freedoms, rather than the taking of an unborn baby's life. But what about the constitutional rights and the reproductive health care of those little unborn women inside of the womb?
There's
That's
nothing
right.
in the Constitution that gives any right to abortion.
Yeah, there's
They
nothing.
throw that
yeah.
term out all the time to make you think you're entitled to some constitutional right, but it's not mentioned in the Constitution.
Well, and as you mentioned before the show when we were talking, Roger, what they're doing is they're redefining terms. They're calling abortion reproductive rights or reproductive freedom, or they're calling abortion health care. So they redefine health care to mean abortion and try to use that to push their agenda. But this is so disingenuous because clearly the issue and being argued here is abortion, not health care. Women have rights to health care all throughout Texas. They can get all sorts of exams and tests and go to doctors, they get medication. That's not the issue. The one issue really being argued is abortion. So she redefines the terms to push her agenda. Use the right term for what she's actually arguing for and reread it. Every woman, everywhere, has the constitutional and moral right to murder their baby in the womb. That's what she's arguing for in reality. And it seems that for some people, that's their sole purpose in life. How can we push this through so women can murder their children? It kind of makes you wonder about their worldview and really what they're aiming for and what's really motivating them.
And we are going to have to watch because there is legislation they're trying to push through Congress right now. It's called the Women's Health Protection Act of 2021. Which was also called the Reproductive Rights Bill, where they're going to try and pass legislation that says guarantee every single, they say, pregnant person, because they don't want to call them women anymore.
Because men can get pregnant now. Did you
right,
know that?
Every pregnant person the right to a legal abortion, and that would kind of, make that Texas law, unlawful, we would say. But the problem is they don't expect it to pass the Senate. So
Yeah, and we're really watching a couple other things that are going through. There's a law in Mississippi, a court case going through to the Supreme Court that's interesting. So we'll see how all those things play out. And that ties into this next story. 25 Texas churches fight heartbeat ban, label abortion a moral and social good. Now, this is a bit misleading because when you see the word church here, this is primarily not Christian churches. There are a few involved here, but a coalition of Texas churches is opposing the state's, this SB 8, the state's ban on abortions when any type of cardiac activity can be detected inside of the womb, and they're calling themselves reproductive freedom congregations. And they have three basic premises that they're trying to espouse as congregations. They say, we trust and respect women. We promise that people who attend our congregation will be free from stigma, shame, or judgment for their reproductive decisions, including abortion. And we believe access to comprehensive and affordable reproductive health services is a moral and social good. So again, if we replace that, we read into that what abortion actually is, the taking of an innocent human life, it's murder. They believe that murder is a moral good for our society.
That's right.
And redefining those terms in a way that, as you notice, there's no biblical support in any of those statements for what they're trying to claim.
Well, and they say they want to eradicate the stigma around reproductive freedom. And again, redefining terms. Just be sure you're aware of that. What do they mean by reproductive freedom? They mean abortion, murdering a baby. So again, just read it again, putting in the right phrase. We want to eradicate the stigma around murdering babies. Are you sure you want to really eradicate that stigma? That should probably stick around, probably there for a good reason, right? But again, as you mentioned earlier, Roger, it's not really quote-unquote Christian churches pushing this, but rather universalists for the most part, right? And then we actually have a whole book series on false religions, or those who want to try to emulate Christianity but aren't quite really Christian when you understand them. You can tell us about that, can't you, Roger?
Yeah, so the Unitarian Universalist churches are one of the main denominations that are promoting this idea. And if you want to be a Unitarian Universalist, you basically deny that there's any one being of God that's the right God to worship, that there's one mode of salvation. None of those things are true. This group actually had its beginnings in New England and started out of the Christian thinking, but they moved toward a universalist idea and then away from a Trinitarian idea toward a Unitarian idea, and then have drifted even further and further. So I wrote a chapter in that book series, World Religions and Cults, that deals with that issue. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can find information in that resource there. Yeah. But there have also been a couple other churches, a Presbyterian church and a Baptist church, who have joined with them. As far as we know, there could be others who are joining along as well.
Yeah, they basically just say your God is whatever you want it to be. It's basically because they describe pretty much anything that you would feel to worship as your God is perfectly fine. And they actually say on their website they welcome agnostic, theist, atheist, and everything in between. So when they use that term church, it's just very loosely.
It's a very loose term.
I like this quote from Valerie here in the comments on the YouTube page. Valerie says this, that abortion is not health care, it is healthcare denial for the baby. It's well worded. Good job,
Definitely
Valerie.
that. All right, here's a fun one for us.
Yay, fun.
Who will buy Big John, the biggest triceratops ever found? So this is a giant triceratops fossil. Now we know triceratops because it's got those big 3 horns. The ceratopsians, that big frill around the top of their head. And this guy is called Big John because he is the largest triceratops that's ever been found. So across his frill is about 2 meters. That's 6.5 feet. So that's me. If I were standing up, I'm 6.5 feet, or 5'18" for your short people, so you don't feel offended. So he would be as wide across the frill as I am tall, and that's massive.
That's pretty big.
If you want to get a sense of that, I'll be standing down next to the stage after the show. And you can...
And we all agree that I can't imagine a better specimen than to have this one here at the Creation Museum. So we're looking for that generous donor to go to Paris.
To go, buy
and bid on this auction and win, and then donate it to the Creation Museum.
Yes, he'll become
for the glory of God,
very soon.
Right? It'll be incredible.
Because
it'll be great
they
teaching
found it in
around
South Dakota, so it really belongs. It should come back
It really
to the United
should
States.
come back to the U.S.
So aren't we in this period where we're trying to oppose all this colonial oppression, and people are getting their artifacts back after the colonialists have taken them? Well, that seems only fair that the French have this fossil in their possession right now. They must have taken it. They took it from South Dakota.
That's right.
Right.
Shouldn't we go get it back from them? Aren't they the
Take it back from the
colonialist
French
oppressors?
oppressors. Yeah, that's right.
And they're estimating the auction may only be 1.8 million. So really, it's
not that
that's
bad.
reasonable.
That's a great,
Not bad at all.
buy.
So I definitely think someone can do this for us.
Yeah, this is a very well-preserved specimen. Most of the specimens that we find of very large dinosaurs like this, they're very fragmentary. This one, we think about a skeleton that's found intact, we call it articulated. This one is 60% complete, which is very complete for a large specimen like this. And the rest of it would be made through a process we call compositing. So they put the pieces together to match the opposite sides if they have those pieces, or match it based on other specimens that we have. For example, we have our Allosaur fossil here, Ebenezer. Now, Ebenezer only has a section of his bones present, and so he was made based on a compositing process by a company in Utah who built out the rest of the specimen, and that's all detailed in the exhibit that we've got there explaining that. So Big John, similar, most large fossils that we find like this. So if anybody's got an extra couple $1 million laying around, or knows somebody who does, or you want to get together that church potluck pool and start bidding on Big John for us. That'd be a great way to proclaim the glory of God. Now, they found him buried in thick mud.
Yep.
So how do you think he got there, Brian?
Well, obviously, he died, laid down, mud slowly covered him over a long period of time, and then he permineralized and became a fossil, because that's how fossilization works, right?
Really slow.
Because that's how we get all that detail.
That's why dead things, that's why roadkill always fossilizes. Have you noticed that? Roadkill always fossilizes. It's amazing. Now, roadkill disappears through decomposition and scavengers eating it. So when things die, that's typically what takes place. To get a fossil, you do cover it with thick mud or something like that, but the burial must be rapid typically, and usually a very deep burial to protect it from scavengers, oxygen, and decomposition. So this is probably a rapid burial during a flood, maybe post-flood. Yeah, exactly.
They say that. They recognize it
to
had
have
to be
this
rapid.
fossil form.
When would we have had rapid burial?
Yeah, well, during a
When would
global
that-
flood,
yeah.
right? Or maybe some major post-flood events right after the flood. I mean, would make really good sense within the biblical worldview. And this, I mean, we didn't point this out yet, but the fossil, not only is a frill 6.5 feet, but it's 26 feet long. So if you play basketball from the out-of-bounds line to the top of the three-point line, all right, 26 feet long. It has horns 4 feet long, a foot wide at the base. I mean, this thing's an awesome specimen. Please, if you got the money, buy it and donate it. It'd be awesome. I'm excited about that. This is a lot better than talking about abortion. Can I just say that?
It is. It's a lot more fun. All right, our next article, Christian scholars slam report arguing that LGBT progress doesn't threaten Christians. So some analysis was done of writings and various ways that we've tried to examine the influence of the progressive LGBTQ laws and movements and different rulings from courts that have taken effect, especially since 2015 when the Obergefell decision was handed down. So it's in the last 6 years, and as we've seen various suits come against cake bakers and florists and photographers and various municipalities passing laws as far as where people can live and rental agreements and all these things that have been in play for the last number of years and how those have affected Christians. Now, as a Christian and understanding these things, we might just assume that we're being attacked and that society is being eroded, and we might look at those things and have kind of a fear factor of everything that's going on around us, and we see society crumbling, and we don't want to overreact to those things and think that everything bad is happening around us without having actual data to support those things, because oftentimes we can have those emotional reactions to things that are happening and think we're being attacked. So we would want actual data to support those things. So these scholars put out this report that says, calm down, Christians, it's not as bad as you think. People love you. Nobody's trying to hurt you and persecute you, and nobody's trying to take away your freedoms. And there were other Christians who responded to that report.
Yeah, so basically what happened is the people doing this initial study, they quoted some work from a guy named George Yancey from Baylor University, who was looking at how Christians have been affected by the new liberal progressive movement in our culture today. And Yancey actually made the claim that, looking at many years of study, it seems that the view of Christians amongst the populace really hasn't changed that much. There's not that much more antagonism towards those who hold a Christian worldview. And so the people who did their study quoted that part of his research, but then they ignored the second part of his research, which said, but those who don't like Christianity have grown exponentially in power in our culture. And that has affected Christians quite dramatically, but they ignored that part. And so those who were doing the study were kind of picking and choosing the data.
And a lot more outspoken
That's
than
right.
they were originally, too, when they're talking about this.
Yep.
And they do go on to talk about the Equality Act and the effect of, they can say that it's not affecting our religious freedom, but it's very clearly, as you can see, legislation is trying to be pushed through, that it's nothing short of restricting religious freedom, because it's going to force us as Christians to accept ideology that is against, what God's word clearly says.
Yeah, and another of Yancey's concerns is it really the analysis by these groups didn't really take into account any control groups. So as you look at other groups and how they interact with these with the LGBT community and how it affects them. So you might consider another group like the Islamic community and those groups. They would have the same types of concerns as Christians would when it comes to issues like gay marriage. And thinking about some of the cases that are brought up here as examples of the type of persecution that's come against Christians, there have not been, as far as I know, any public cases brought against Islamic bakers where the homosexual couple has come and asked the Islamic baker to bake them a cake, and they've said no, and they've sued them, and that's gone up through the court system. If there have been, those things haven't been publicized. They're the things that I've been aware of. And so those types of communities would have the same concerns. So as we look at those things, more than just anecdotally, it seems very clear that that type of differentiation is clearly happening in the culture. And it's not that Christians are just worried about losing control and worried about not having control over the society. It's that we trust that God's design is the best design for how our society should run. If He is the creator, He is the one who has organized this world. He's the one who has given us families. He's the one who's created us male and female in His image. Then His pattern for life is the one that we should follow. And if we're fallen beings that are sinful, then it's the gospel message that's going to bring hope and restoration to that broken, sinful part of our relationships and our societies and our nations and ultimately the whole universe at the return of Christ.
Absolutely. At the end of the article, it's kind of rebutting the idea that this has not been affecting Christians. They list all these cases, as Roger mentioned, where Christians are being attacked for their Christian views. He mentions a teacher who was fired because he had a biblical view of gender. And of course, Jack Phillips, the baker over in Colorado, and the Christian florist. It mentions Christian foster care system being attacked because they won't embrace the secular views of the LGBTQ plus movement. List all those, and there could be more that could be listed. And as I read through this, what this article reminds me of are those who are saying that we're not being negatively affected by the LGBTQ movement in our culture. It reminds me of, remember the CNN reporter who was reporting on the riots about a year or two ago? And the burnings were building behind him, and he said it's a mostly peaceful protest. That's what this reminds me of. They ignore the fires behind me. This is mostly good and nothing to worry about. It's the same sort of thing here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on to some interesting stuff out of the Middle East. Stone Age humans or their relatives occasionally trekked through a green Arabia. So if you think about the Arabian Peninsula and the way the out of Africa model would work in the evolutionary framework, if humans evolved originally in Africa, they would have had to migrate out of Africa to get to places like Europe and Asia. And so they would have had to go through Arabia in one sense or another. And so some of the models have suggested a Red Sea crossing in southern Arabia. Now they're looking at this site that's suggesting the crossing was probably further north. And they're finding these lake beds where it seems these Homo species, as they would refer to them, these hominids, were moving through these areas in their time scale 400,000 years ago and less, transferring back and forth between Southeast Asia and Europe and interacting with one another and taking both their tools as they moved in and out of those areas as well as their genetic material. And so they're trying to understand how this movement would have influenced the hereditary traits of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and other people groups as they would understand them from the evolutionary framework. But from a biblical perspective, we've got to put this type of thing right around the time of the dispersion of Babel and the Ice Age and things that are going on there. But the Arabian desert is just desert. So how do we explain all this green stuff around there?
We got some really good exhibits both here at the Creation Museum and at the Ark Encounter talking about the post-flood ice age. And so after the flood, it's a perfect time for an ice age for numerous reasons, and that'll be more the extreme geography of the world at the time, but more closer to the equator, that water's going to come down in the form of a lot of rain for various reasons. So we expect there to be a lot of lush greenery closer to the equator towards the end of the flood for various reasons detailed on our website at the attractions as well. So we expect to find greenery. We expect to find unique features post-flood that may have gone away over time as things have become less green, less rain post-flood. Also, after the flood, you think about it, as the waters are receding off the continents, any bowl-shaped depression will be full of water, making natural lakes pretty quickly post-flood, filled with more water from rain happening after the flood. So we expect a lot of greenery in these areas, animals in those areas. They said they found even fossilized hippos.
Hippos in Saudi Arabia.
In Saudi Arabia. How cool is that, right? Fossilized hippos, other unique creatures. Makes sense within the biblical worldview and the biblical time scale. And so we expect to find this. What we disagree with totally is, of course, their time scale of hundreds of thousands of years based on a secular interpretation of present-day observations. But really, all this stuff that we find, we expect from a biblical perspective.
And here's what was fascinating. They said across the 5 occupation phases covering hundreds of thousands of years, different Homo species or closely related populations were doing broadly the same thing.
Camping out on a lakeside, making basically the same tools.
All the tools they
pretty
found.
much all look the same.
That's what Roger does every weekend. All right? Camping, making stone tools.
But I mean, we would expect to see that because the time frame isn't hundreds of thousands of years. It's just a very short time span.
Yeah, so if we take that time scale and compress it into what we would think of as a biblical time scale, people moving back and forth through this area very quickly, what might have become a trade route early in that period, and we can see how this is just people being people, moving back and forth through this area.
And all human.
Yeah,
we want to stress that. They're saying it's different, you know, Neanderthal, and they're trying to say they were not all fully human.
But those were all humans.
They're all just human.
Yeah,
Right.
they're all varieties within the humankind, within that one human race. All right, interesting study here, learning from a living fossil. I want to read the summary statement from this Science Daily article. As we live and breathe, ancient-looking fish known as bowfin are guarding genetic secrets that can help unravel humanity's evolutionary history and better understand its health.
I can look at that and see human evolutionary history, can't you?
Just
Roger?
take that in for a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see your health in that, can't you? Just look at it. It's a bowfin.
And you can see your history in that as well. Can't
All right,
you?
so-
Looks like
so
Uncle
what-
Leroy.
What the researchers
Whatever.
are looking at here is the common ancestor of humans and fish. Okay? You can get in touch with your inner fish. Some of you guys like to do that on the weekend, right? Go out on the boat and catch one of your distant cousins
And then eat
fry
them.
up on the
I
grill.
know, right?
Okay. So
Yeah.
we share this ancestry with fish from an evolutionary perspective. So at a chromosome level, they're trying to reassemble the chromosome structure of this bowfin fish. Now, the reason they're interested in this group of fish is because they have this very large gas bladder structure that allows them to gulp air, and along with this group and the lungfish and the gar and other groups, they think these are more closely related to those creatures that first came onto land, so they would be more closely related to us as primates. And so they're looking for genetic links between us and these fish, and then looking at genetic links between us and other fish, and trying to see how closely related we are to one another. And they're examining all of these things, so they finally have a detailed chromosome level gene assembly that they can look at and try and examine those things.
And a quick interjection here, Roger, too. They call the bowfish a living fossil because it's seen at the fossil record at a particular level. They're not seen anymore. And then we find it alive. And its living counterpart looks pretty much identical to its ancient ancestor. So based on evolutionary thinking, it's not really evolved that much or evolved very slowly. And so we have like a modern day preservation of this ancient version of a fish that we can maybe look at to get a better understanding of who we are. And so to understand that's what the term living fossil means as we use it in context.
Sure.
What I have to say, though, I just have to add this in, because they say that this is the last common ancestor shared by fish and humans had air-filled organs. And I'm thinking, and Brian agreed with me, that this must be Aquaman.
Yes.
It must be
Right?
what they, it has to be
It
what they
makes
related
really
on,
good sense.
because he would be that hybrid that they're kind of talking about here.
The movies get it right.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
And
And Roger's speechless.
I have some recollection of who Aquaman is. It's one of those. It's a DC person, right?
It is a DC person.
It
That's
is,
true.
yes.
Yeah,
I
we
was
prefer Marvel
hoping to get it
typically,
wrong.
but
I was
DC,
hoping it was
yeah.
Marvel,
You're
and
right,
you'd yell
yeah.
at me for getting that wrong. So as they try and understand these connections, what they're trying to do is develop model species where they can look at genetic factors inside of one species and how we can look at those things in this species and how that might impact certain medicines or processes that are happening inside of humans. So as they do different process studies and biochemical studies, we can use animals as models to see how things will work in humans and these different
And there
pathways.
was factors they were looking for, and when they were trying to say we're trying to find humic genetic elements, and they say they couldn't find it, and they just give the conclusion that they always do, and they just say, well, there was eons of evolution there. It's
Sure.
obscured, it's hidden by millions of years, and so trust us, this is what happened, but we just have no observational science to prove that. So
It's
that's
all
a common theme in articles like this.
It's all based on their worldview. And here's the thing, bear in mind that people who are writing this research and doing it, they're really smart, they're brilliant people, especially in their particular fields. They just have the wrong worldview about the past. They're building their thinking on man's ideas, evolutionary thinking about history. They interpret things through that grid, and that's why they get these sort of conclusions that, well, a fish must be your ancestor. And to me, I look at this, and you kind of read this line here. It says, all told, the team doing the research included researchers from 6 states, as well as from France, Japan, and Switzerland. And when I read that, I just think you got all these people, really bright, especially in their fields of study, who are wasting so much time, money, and effort because they've got the wrong worldview, which makes them ask the wrong questions, which makes them get the wrong answers. And so you're really just wasting so many resources and talent. And the evolutionary worldview, really rightly understood, is so anti-science when you really get down to it.
Yeah. Are there connections between these creatures? Absolutely,
Oh,
because
sure.
that's what they are. They're creatures. They're created as creatures that God has made in their distinct kinds, not as things that have evolved from one kind into another. And as a master designer, he's going to use certain elements that work well in those environments and repeat those things. And if this fish needs to breathe oxygen and we need to breathe oxygen, we would expect to find some common engineering structures there that would be the same
From a
to
common
solve those
designer.
problems. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, that's all the time we've got for you today. We hope you can join us again on Monday. God bless.
See you
Bye.
guys.